So, back in Photoshop, we're getting through it, guys, hang in there. So in Photoshop, you can actually add different disks to be scratched disks. So for instance, Liv, if you were desperate, you couldn't get that stuff off of your computer, you can actually add a hard drive to your computer. I'll show you. I'll add one to mine right here so that you can see what it looks like. You can add a hard drive to your computer and dedicate it as the scratch disk. So it would be an external hard drive. It's a little bit clunky. It's not quite as fast as using the one that's inside your computer because that connection is just as fast as, that's the fastest you can possibly get. But again, this is a way to certainly alleviate the problem. There's some downsides to it, but I'll show you what it is I mean. So I am going to go ahead and say OK to this. And I may have to quit Photoshop and redo it, but we'll see. Yep, no, it's mine right here. So this, did I start a video? Yeah. Yep, OK. So I've just added this hard drive on here, and you'll see when I had to close up the preference window to get my computer to rewrite to acknowledge the hard drive I just plugged in. So I just plugged in this external hard drive that's called Versa 1 TB HD. So it's a terabyte hard drive that I just plugged in. If you want to use this in place of or in addition to your hard drive that's inside of your computer, you need to add it first. You need to click on it to enable it. And then if you click on the whole hard disk, you can change the order. What hard drive is going to be used first? You would actually want this external to be first, because what will happen is once your first hard drive fills completely up in the scratch disk, it'll go to your second one and it'll start building a scratch disk on your second one, so it'll give you some breathing room. However, you don't want the computer, you don't want your internal hard drive to fill up first, because that's, again, it's holding the stuff that is running your computer, and it will screw up with your OS. So you would select this one and then use these little arrows to actually take it all the way to the top. Now what happens is that if I were to use this set up like this, when I launch Photoshop, it would use this external hard drive. The problem with this is that number one, right now, I've made these changes. You have to restart Photoshop for this to take effect. Even though it looks like it's happening here, it isn't. Once you restart it, it will then take effect. The other downside to this is that if you don't have your hard drive plugged in, if you don't have this external one plugged in, it's not going to tell you that. It's going to simply revert back to using your internal hard drive, and you're back to the problem that you had to begin with. But this is a way, for people who do a lot of this kind of work, whatever, this is how you would actually deal with that. If you are going to dedicate additional space to a hard drive, most people would say the safety range to work in is 60 to 120 gigabytes. If you've got that kind of available space for a scratch disk, there's little chance that you're going to hit that scratch disk error problem. So for what that's worth, I'm going to undo this and bring it back down, and then go to cursors. These are important. So in cursors, you want to, on the painting cursors, you want to make sure that normal brush tip is selected, and you also want to actually hit show crosshair in the brush tip. It will look like the little preview does. So instead of having your icons look like a paintbrush or a paint bucket or any of that kind of stuff, it simply circles with crosshairs. It shows you how big your brush is, and the crosshair really gives you a very precise center of your cursor, and that part matters, especially when we're doing some clone stamp work, that kind of stuff. Being able to line that stuff up matters. Also, in the other cursors, you want to select them, set them to precise, not standard. I know you guys are going to miss that little eyedropper, but nobody uses that shit. I can't believe that Photoshop still sends it this way, but they do. So nonetheless, that's how you want to set your cursors up. In your transparency and gamut, by default, this color warning, your gamut warning, is a gray. It's a middle gray. That will not tell you anything. If you put an image open, so what your gamut warning is showing you is it's telling you, for instance, if you're looking at, you can do a soft proof on your computer. You're looking at your image file inside of Photoshop, and you want to know, can this color actually print to my printer? Well, you can load the profiles of your printer, and you will then run this gamut warning, and it will flag areas, and it will say, oh, this area is not going to be able to be reproduced. This is too saturated to do that. If your warning, though, is in black and white, you can't ever see it. I mean, if there's a huge area, you might be able to see it, but otherwise you can never spot it. You want this thing to be neon. So if you click on the color, it will open up your color picker dialog box, and I'm just going to tell you the values to type in. We're going to do this a lot in this class. So typically I work in RGB values. Occasionally we'll work in other values, but for the beginning right now, it will be RGB. If you select the red value of the dialog box that opens up, you type in 0 for red, then hit your tab key. It will take you to the green. Instead of having to select every one, you use the tab keys to run through all of these. Hit the tab key and type in 255. Hit the tab key again to go to the blue channel and type in 0. That will give you a pure green, and then simply say OK. And now when you actually put this color warning on, unless you're shooting pictures of some blacklight convention that's got a lot of neon green in it, you'll see exactly what you want to see in all of this. In terms of units and rulers, this goes back really old school, and it just depends. So I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but who does graphics work as well. Do you care if your screen is showing you an exact resolution replication of what you're doing in real life? So you care that an inch on your screen is an inch in real life, right? So most photographers don't care about that. We just zoom in and zoom out for that kind of stuff. If this matters to you, by default, this 72 screen resolution, 72 pixels per inch, has not existed. This is you remember like old TV set that was like bigger than this thing, giant TV set, whatever, CRT? That's what the resolution was on those. For all our laptops, these monitor, all this kind of stuff, the resolution of these things is well up in the 120s, 130s. If you want to figure out what your resolution really is to know the value to actually put in here, what you do is, again, just watch my screen here. You guys don't need to do this, but this is how you would do it. You come up to your system preferences. You click on displays. You actually then click on display settings. This is for me. And in my built-in Retina display right here, you do not check this resolution for default because it doesn't give you the information that you want. You click on this scaled right here, and it'll show you what the default is. And if you hover over it, you can see, I'm hovering over this, it says that it gives you the dimensions of your screen in pixels, and that's what matters. So you can see it says 1,444 pixels wide by 900 pixels tall. That is my screen resolution. That's how many pixels. So side to side on my screen, I can do 1,440, right? Then you take out a measuring tape and you measure the width of your screen. And in my screen's case, let's say it's 10 inches wide. You divide that 1,440 by 10, and you get 144 pixels per inch. That's the resolution of your screen. Does that make sense to everyone? Again, this is not something you have to do. You can clearly see I've never changed mine. But if this really begins to matter, if you need what you see on your screen to represent what it will be in real life, then this is what you have to actually do. And then so you would simply say, okay, I get that part. I'm going to go back to my default because I don't want to change anything on this. And then in here, I would simply change this to 144. So that way, if you're working on a big monitor, it's going to be a lot wider, but it'll also have more pixels. So whether it's a 4K monitor, all that kind of stuff matters. So that's how you would figure it out. Are you good on that part? Yeah, more than you ever needed to know, right? All the rest of this, the guides, the slices, the plugins, all of this stuff, we can leave as it is. Yeah, the tech preview part right here, go ahead and click on that. I just need to make sure that you've actually got this enabled. So enable preserve details 2.0 upscale. I don't know whether this is default or not. And then the precise previews for 16-bit documents. Say what?
It is.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so far, are we good?
Mine doesn't have that.
Again, older version of Photoshop, when you upgrade, it will. But this isn't going to stop you from, the version that you have is more than enough to do everything we do in this class. So if you don't want to deal with that, you're fine. Go ahead and say, okay, for the Windows people, yours keeps going a little bit further, because I think the Windows people, anyway, for the Macintosh people, I don't know why this is, but it is. Most important setting that you can actually do in all of this is go to the Edit menu, down to Color Settings. Now, why they have separated this out, and this is not a part of preferences, I will never know. It is on Windows, but it isn't on us. So, how many of you, when you open this thing up, have North American General Purpose 2? Every single one of your computers is wrong. It's set up wrong. And it's hugely wrong. This is the default that Photoshop ships with. But the problem with this is that every file that you open up in Photoshop now will be opened in sRGB. So even if you've got a ProPhoto RGB space or Adobe RGB, which is what I suggest you work in, yes?
How did you get to that screen?
So it's up at the Edit menu down to Color Settings. Again, why they put it there, nobody knows. But the problem gets even worse on this is that because all of the warnings that you've got down here about mismatching are turned off. So you've got a file that you've been working on for years, you take it to another computer that you're not familiar with, it's set up like this, you open that file, it is automatically converted to sRGB, which is a smaller color space than Adobe RGB. That's the color theory part that we're going to get into today. It makes that change for you, and if you save that file, you have thrown away all the color that you've had all that time in your life. That's just gone, and there's no way to recover it. You have to start over again. That's just gone. And this doesn't tell you any of that. This is the proverbial hand the baby in the crib the gun. Because this is how to fuck up all of your stuff. And this is critical. So you need to actually change this. If you click on the drop-down menu, there is a preset that works for this. It's North American Pre-Press 2. If you select that, what it does is it changes your Adobe RGB color space to Adobe RGB, but it also preserves all of your embedded profiles, and it also puts on all the warnings. So now if you were to open a file that was in a space other than Adobe RGB, you get this dialog box that opens up right away and saying, you're trying to open this in a different color space. What do you want to do? Do you want to leave it in the one that it's in, or do you want to convert it to the new one? You get to make the choice. But it warns you, you won't get screwed up on this. But the shipping version of Photoshop ships with a small-ass color space. They're in bed with Microsoft. I know they are. And that's why. Make sense? So you want to make sure that this gets changed, and then you want to say okay to that. Then you would think we were done. We're not done. We're getting close, though. Also, back up to the Edit menu, and I'm sorry, guys, I don't know for the Windows people. I'm not entirely certain where this happens. I think it's still in this Edit bar. But, yeah, I'm sorry. Shoot.
So I'm at the color settings section, and so originally my thing was in custom.
Yeah.
But it would only let me do this if I did the...
Oh. Well, if you don't want that, you can uncheck that. The only things that you really care about is that this stays as Adobe RGB,
okay,
and that all the preserves are there, and that the warnings are all there. Okay. So, and you can actually name that color space. You could call it, Aaron's color space settings if you wanted to. So if you just click on the drop-down menu, you'll see there's a way to save it. So that way you know it's not some weird thing. You might be able to just type directly in there.
Or like... No, maybe not.
Huh. Anyway, this is what you want.
Okay.
So, and you'll be good.
Okay. Thank you.
And unless you change it, these are sticky. It'll stay there. Okay. So the next thing we're going to go after here really quickly are, if you open up the menus tab down at the bottom, this thing will actually open up. Let me look and see where these guys really are. I don't do this too often, so, sorry, it's not the menu one at all. You can cancel out of that. Back up to the edit menu, down to keyboard shortcuts. In the keyboard shortcuts, now this again is how you like the behavior. Do you do a lot of work in like Illustrator or something else? Yeah, so unfortunately there's not this consistency across the board with all the suites that Adobe, the programs that it puts out. Traditionally in the Macintosh world, if you hit Command-Z, it goes back one step. So let's say let's say I've got a file that's open, I've got a curve that's on, and I change the curve, I add a lot of red. And then I don't like it, and I want to undo it. I hit Command-Z, it undoes it. If I hit Command-Z again, it doesn't go back another place in history, it actually redoes the red. It just goes back and forth between these two steps. They just go back and forth between the two. If you want to continue to go back in history progressively, on a Macintosh you actually have to add the Option key. So you hold down Command Option Z, and then every time you hit that Z, it will go back to the point where you opened your file. In the Illustrator, I think, never worked like that. In Illustrator, if you just hit Command-Z, it would continue to go back. If you wanted to do just the back and forth between two states, you added the Option key. There are people, myself being one of them, who've worked in Photoshop for 20, 30 years, and when they changed this, so they flipped the behavior. So now they made Photoshop work more like Illustrator does, and so now, if you don't change anything, if you hit Command-Z, you don't have to add the Option key, you will simply go back in time. I don't like that behavior, number one, because I didn't grow up with it, but number two, if I go back and forth between two states, it's like having a preview, and I like that part of it. I prefer that action. Depending on which one you want, if you want to not have to add the Option key to this, to simply go back between two states, then you want to actually check this Use Legacy Undo Shortcuts. If you don't like that behavior, you would leave it where it is. That's the only thing that we need to deal with there. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Two things left to change, and then we'll be good to go. Come down to the toolbar. In the toolbar, when this opens up, this actually allows you to customize your toolbar that's on the side. Same thing, menu. Edit menu. All the way down, kind of at the bottom, toolbar. See it? Yeah. Okay. This allows you to customize what's going on over here. So if you take a look in your toolbar, so these are all the tools on the far left side over here. So, it's the lasso tool, the brush tool, the clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, all of that stuff is over here. This gives you control about what you see and what you don't see on there, and it also allows you to move stuff around. So if you take a look at it, you'll see that each one of these tools represents something on the toolbar, and if it's got multiples, like this has got two of them that are connected in this one area right here, what that means is that in this drop-down menu, let me cancel out of this, in this drop-down menu, I have two tools. So that's what's going on here. The reason I point this out is that occasionally stuff will disappear. One of them that's notorious for disappearing is the mixer brush tool right here. If the tool is missing, it'll be sitting over here in what they call the extra tools. You can see I just removed my mixer brush from it. If I want to move the mixer brush back to where it was, it's actually right in here in the brush set. You simply come in here, and when you see the blue line go around, you let go, and it actually puts it in here. If you always use the mixer brush tool and you want that to be your primary one instead of just the regular brush, you can actually change the order of this, and you can actually bring it up to the top. If you love the mixer brush, or any other tool for that matter, that you use all the time and you're pissed off that you've got to do these drop-down menus to get to it, you can actually put these right in the middle, and then they're in nothing, and now I've got a dedicated mixer brush that's sitting right here. So it's simply a way to actually do that, but the reason I point this out is that, again, I lose the mixer brush all the time. If you do that, you can always click on this Restore Defaults, and it will actually load everything. It'll load them all up the way it ships, which is this way right here. But again, if you never use the Spot Healing Brush tool, you only use the regular Healing Brush tool, you can move this up to the top so that when you select J for it, you get the healing brush tool, not the spot healing brush tool. Make sense? Okay. So I'm going to hit done on that. We are almost finished. The last thing, and again, I'm sorry to the Windows people, I think this is in your normal preferences down at the bottom of the edit menu, but for those of you, but it might be in this drop-down menu right here. If you come down to preferences on the Macintosh, at the very bottom down here, you'll see Camera Raw. If you open up the Camera Raw preferences, there's stuff in here that we need to change that actually matters quite a bit. And I'm going to show you why in just a second. So in the general part that we actually have up here at the top, let me check my notes here. Yeah. So what this is that how do things function when you come into Camera Raw in Photoshop? So if you simply double-click on a raw file or drag it on top of Photoshop, not into Lightroom, whatever, it comes into Camera Raw, which is like the developing space in Lightroom, and this will actually control how that all looks. For me, the shipping default of it puts your thumbnails along the bottom of your screen and then your preview in the middle. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I've just double-clicked on a raw file. It's coming up. This is now in Camera Raw. I prefer to have my thumbnails on the side over here instead of along the bottom here. So that's what we're talking about changing right here. Hopefully this is going to not let me get to it, but maybe I can get to it from here. Yep. So anyway, I changed the orientation to vertical here because that's where I actually want it to be. Again, this, don't ask me why. You would think if you wanted to use legacy undos in Photoshop that you would probably want to use them in Camera Raw as well. This is where you would actually change that. So click on Use Legacy Undo Shortcuts if that's the behavior that you want. For the file handling here, this is an important one, and for all of you who are working in Lightroom, you should be doing the same thing. You should go into your Lightroom preferences. I've actually got a PDF on our website about all of this. You actually want to have your sidecar files created in Lightroom. So what happens in Lightroom, you import a bunch of raw files, and anything that you do in Lightroom to those raw files is kept in the database that is Lightroom. It doesn't create sidecar files. The problem with that is that if your database is corrupted, you lose all the edits that you did. If you actually enable sidecar files, there is a backup file that is actually written that's specific to the image that sits right alongside of your image, so that if you have to create a brand new Lightroom catalog and re-import everything, all of your edits are saved and all of that will come in. Does that make sense? I'll show you that at some point. Somebody just remind me next week that we should look at Lightroom that way. In terms of performance down here, this again is where you deal with the graphics processor part. Mine's set to auto, but you can actually turn it off here if you're getting that glitchy behavior. In the raw defaults, this one is critical. When you guys click on raw defaults, what do you see in the global? Adobe what? Oh, Adobe default, which is meaningless. It means nothing. Look what happens here. I got to show this to you right here. I'm going to cancel out of this really quickly, and I think I can turn this on and off, so hang on one second. Under optics in here, the two things that you want turned on that are not on by default, you guys can actually, if you don't bother to open a raw file right now because we don't need to take the time to do it. I'm just going to show you right here. But two things that you've got going are remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections, which are basically the profiles of your lenses. They're optical corrections. Watch what happens to this image when I turn the correction off. You guys see that? Two things happen here. The first is, without this correction, my lens, the lens that I used on this, which is, you can find the lens information if we look at the metadata, it has what they call barrel distortion. It means that the center of the image is actually looks like it's protruding out of the image and the edges are receding away. That's called barrel distortion. It's basically, if you imagine wrapping your image around the front of a barrel, that's supposed to be the analogy. The opposite of that is pin cushioning. And in pin cushioning, what happens is that the center of your image seems to be receding away from you and the edges of your image appear to be coming towards you. Why on earth would you not want to correct that automatically and have that for every image? Well, the way the Adobe ships, that's not how it's set up. They make you turn it on. And you have to turn it on for every single image. Nobody wants to do that. So we are going to use the preferences that I was just in to actually change that behavior. But while we're here to show you the other problem, anybody here know what chromatic aberration really is? It helps if you can see it. Here, there's a good sample of it right here. Yeah. So I think, you can see it on your screen. See this green line right here? The edge, it's pure green. What's actually harder to see, but you can see it a little bit, you can see it a little bit here, is there's a magenta one that's running along the other side. That is chromatic aberration. What happens is that lenses are, unless you spend a fortune on a lens, they're not perfect. And what happens in chromatic aberration is that as light comes through the lens, different colors of light work at different wavelengths, and they actually hit your sensor at different places. Some actually would be focused beyond your sensor, some are actually focused at the front of your sensor, and then some are actually on your sensor. But that difference in focusing of colored lights is what causes chromatic aberration. When I actually made this file, they didn't have automatic chromatic aberration taken off of this. I retouched every single one of these branches by hand. Clone stamp. Took me a week. Now you can click on it with a button. Watch what happens. Let me see if I can zoom in even more. You might be able to, I just want to make sure everybody can really see it. Yeah, you see that really green line right there? So if you click on chromatic aberration, gone. And every file is subject to this. So the two things that you definitely want on are remove chromatic aberration and to use the optical profiles of your lenses, right? So to get to that, in your preferences for camera raw, if you click on this drop-down menu that is in the global presets, so again, I'm in the raw defaults, I'm in this drop-down menu right here, come down to choose preset, come all the way over down to optics, and down to lens plus chromatic aberration correction. That's how you want yours set up. Now, I'm certain there's a way to do this in Lightroom as well, but I don't work in Lightroom, so I'm not really, I can't promise that, but I would be surprised if there wasn't. Anyway, now if you set that and it shows this preset, optics plus lenses plus chromatic aberration, you don't need to worry about this ever again. Every single one that you open will actually have those corrections applied to it. Nice. Workflow in here, we are going to make sure that your color working space is Adobe RGB. Is anybody in this room working in ProPhoto RGB? Most of you have your Lightroom set up wrong, because most of you, when you bring an image in from Lightroom into Photoshop, doesn't it come in as ProPhoto RGB? ProPhoto RGB is a gigantic color space, and if you are working in ProPhoto RGB, it's fine, but you have to be working in 16-bit. You need that extra bit depth to deal with the number of colors that are existing in ProPhoto RGB. If you don't, the minute you make one color correction or tone correction in Photoshop, you will get banding. Your skin tones will get pulled apart, your skies will get pulled apart. It's a nightmare. So if you want to work in ProPhoto RGB, you're welcome to, but you have to be in 16-bit, and that doubles your file size. And it also doubles the time everything takes. So if you've got an 8-bit image and it takes 30 seconds to run a blur on it, it's going to take a minute to do it in 16-bit. Make sense? So anyway, I strongly suggest, because I also work in Smart Objects in here, which actually keeps the integrity of this. So strongly suggest you change this to Adobe RGB. The bit depth of this should be 8 bits. You're good to go here. Do not check on resizing. Nobody uses any of this stuff right here. It doesn't matter unless you're trying to resample your image. So just leave it turned off. Nobody does output sharpening in Camera Raw. All of the files that you make could be destined for different places, right? Oh, I'm going to use this image on my website, relatively small image. Oh, I'm going to use this as a print, larger image. Oh, I'm going to use this for a billboard, way larger image, all that kind of stuff. All of your sharpening is dependent on the size of what your output is. You have no idea what your output is here, and if you click on this, you're locked into one. You've already done your output sharpening, and you can't change that. So do not turn this on. And then finally, I work in Photoshop in Smart Objects. How many people in this room have no idea what a Smart Object is? Okay, no, don't worry. That's not a loaded question. It just gives me some. We go through Smart Objects in a big way. Smart Objects are a way to work non-destructively in Photoshop, and that is the hallmark. If I teach you nothing else in this class, it is that you can always step backward. You never destroy it. You never do something that is so damaging that you cannot recover from it. And I don't mean recover from it while you're editing. I mean recover from it 5 years from now. So for me, I prefer to have the automatic behavior of Photoshop set as Smart Objects, so I click this thing at the bottom. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and click it. We'll see how it works out, and you guys can make the call later if that's something that you want. Because you can change it once you're in Camera Raw. It's just a question of what do you want the default behavior to be, not that you're going to be locked into never working with a Smart Object if you don't click this. That's not the case. Are there questions about this? And then click on Technology Previews one more time. Yeah, we don't need to do that. And simply hit OK. So I am done with this. I don't need that. So this is great. You've done all of this work, and it's wonderful. Your computer is now set up the way you want it to be set up. But now two possibilities are going to happen. The first possibility is something starts happening horribly wrong in Photoshop. You pick a brush and it turns out to be a selection tool, or you pick the selection tool and it turns out to be doing brush work, that kind of stuff. You need to reset your preferences. So to do that, I need everybody to whip out their phone. Actually, this is on one of the PDFs that I've got to you, but I want everybody, that's how important this actually is. And I want you to shoot a picture of this. Let me get it a little bit bigger. I'll get it as big as I can get it. Yeah. Okay. So this is what we've got going on here. Right now, because your computer is in its virgin state, we're not going to do this right now. You can do this when you go home tonight or sometime in the next day or two. Do not do a lot of work in Photoshop, because the work that you do can actually pervert your preferences, and you want a virgin copy of your preferences, although I'm giving you one, so it doesn't really matter. But at any rate, this is where your preference files are saved. If you run into this problem, Photoshop, something is wrong. It's just not working the way it should. Or the things that you set, it's not happening. If something goes wrong, you've got to reset your preferences. To reset your preferences, you have to quit Photoshop. Then in Macintosh, you actually do Option, Command, Shift, and then you start Photoshop. If you do that, a dialog box will come up and say, do you want to reset all the settings? And you say, yes, I do. The problem is that it will get rid of the problems that whatever you're trying to get rid of, but it will also return Photoshop to its shipping, which is what we just spent 2 hours undoing. If you're on Windows, it's Alt-Control-Shift and then start Photoshop. Again, Photoshop has to be quit. You hold down the keyboard combination, you start Photoshop, a dialog box will come up. Do you want to reset this? And you say, yes, I want to reset this, whatever. But now, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to reset your preferences all over again, and you don't? Because I've given you the preference setups that we have just done, and this underneath it is where they go. So if you're in a Macintosh, you go to your user folder, to the library, which you guys normally can't get to, but I'll show you how to get to it, to the preference folder to Adobe Photoshop version settings. If you have, like in my case, I've got a folder here that's for Adobe Photoshop 2019, one for 2020, one for 2022, and one for 2020. You have to put it in the right one. It's whatever version of Photoshop you're running. But you simply drop that file into it and then launch Photoshop and you'll be good to go. For the Windows people, this is where yours is, right here. Make sense? Yeah. You'll be so happy. Even if you don't have this problem like this, let's just say you're going to go in and you want your preference settings to be on, you're going to work on one of these iMacs here or at the studio or here in the lab or in the digital print lab there, whatever. All you need to do is go into this very same folder, drop your preference files in there. All those computers reset every night, so it's not like you're going to screw anything up. And then it'll be set up correctly for you. Nice, right? We're going to make a custom workspace now, the custom workspace that I'm using, and that's actually where these things, oh, actually I take it back. The custom workspace is actually going to be in this preference folder, and oh, this is for Lightroom. So you can do this very same thing for Lightroom. Once you get Lightroom set up correctly, you can actually save the preference file, and you just put it on your hard drive in a folder, just tuck it away. And you know you always have it. And so if everything goes wrong, you just replace the file instead of having to rebuild all this shit. Make sense? Okay, that's why I had you take a picture of this. If you then look at your folder of the files that you downloaded or that you copied over, there's a number of goodies in here, and you should look through these goodies over the course of the next week. The assignments for this first week are very small, but if you take a look at this Photoshop Lightroom preference and setting files, this is where they are right here. This is the settings file, and this is actually the Lightroom Classic settings file that you would replace. If you're on Windows, this is your version of it. So I've built these things and given them to you. What a guy. Yes?
So just so I understand correctly, if I pull these up on my other computer
Yeah.
and do this,
Mm-hmm.
and it just,
That's all you got to do.
oh wow,
I know, right? I told you it was all about speed.
oh fantastic.
Yeah, I know, right? If there's questions about this, bring them next week. We can take a little bit of time out to get you through this, to walk you through this, all that kind of stuff. But you guys have these all right now. Nice, right? While we're in here, a really quick look around here. The assignments coming up for this week are relatively simple. Again, there is a form on Canvas for you to introduce yourself. Set up your system, whatever that means. Again, I would say set your preferences like you on your home machine or your laptop or whatever. And then there's some readings in the resources that I want you to begin. They're too long to actually, I expect you guys to finish it, but we'll talk about that later. But that's it. You're not turning anything in. The only thing that gets graded in this is the form where you introduce yourself and put in your picture. Please do me a favor. I've actually had people do this before. I had a girl once. She sent me a picture. Okay, you guys know Grant Park, right? Yeah. And you know where the Pritzker Pavilion is? You know oh God, the architect. What's his name? Getting old sucks. Anyway. On the north end of the park is the Pritzker Pavilion. It's the big band shell that's, the just beautiful stainless steel architecture, that kind of stuff, whatever. And then there's the opposite end of Grant Park, the south side of Grant Park, which is Roosevelt Road. So she somehow managed to find somebody to hold her camera at Roosevelt Road while she stood right in front of the Pritzker Pavilion in a hat and sunglasses behind the car door. So the picture that she put up for her picture to, recognize her and get everybody to recognize her, whatever, was unrecognizable. I wasn't even sure there was a person in there, much less could tell what she really looked like. I mean, you couldn't tell anything. It was like this dot. That's exactly what it was. Her face was 1 pixel. And it was this, and then this whole giant scene, all of Grant Park, the lake, the buildings on the side. I mean, anyway, don't do that. Okay, I want to do something first. No, I'm not going to do it first. I think I can get through this in time. Okay, Workspace. So you can do custom workspaces. I'm going to show you how to make this one. We're actually going to make it together. The workspace file is included in your settings file. So the file that you are now going to keep that has all your preferences set up, if we do this custom workspace, it will be part of that. So when you then load that, you will actually have the custom workspace as well. Now, you don't have to use this. I've already told you that. It's not, this is, you don't have to use this if you don't want to. But I've never had a student yet that I know of who didn't go to this. So just for what it's worth. You can do the same work. It's just up to you, okay? All right. So we're going to start, though, with the way Photoshop ships, the way most of you guys have it. If you take a look in Photoshop, again, I don't have anything open in Photoshop. I've just got this screen. If you come up to the window menu and you click on the drop-down to Workspace, so again, take a look at my screen really quickly. So we've got, Workspace. By default, Photoshop ships with its Essentials default workspace. Now you can see there's a whole series of preset workspaces in here. You're not going to have the same ones that I have. This is my retouching workspace right here. Is this retouching 29? You won't have that, or at least if you're on some of these computers, you might actually have that on one of the schools, but if you're on your own, you won't actually have this part. We're going to build it right now. But you can change to other things. If you click on the Essentials, if you want to change workspaces, you can have an infinite number of them. So if you want to change it, though, it's a two-step process, and everybody forgets the second step. So this is the second step. I'm going to change mine to Essentials, and I need everybody else to do this with me. Click on Essentials, and you'll see things change somewhat. We are only halfway through the reset. Go back up to Window, down to Workspace again, and you'll notice that Reset has actually changed its name to Essentials. This is now set to mirror the name of the workspace that we're doing. You need to click on Reset Essentials. That's the second step that you do in all of this. And it's always that way. If I wanted to go back to my workspace, the retouching one, I would click on the retouching one and then immediately back to workspace again and reset retouching 29. So I'm going to change this back to default. And again, second version of it to reset this. So has everybody got a screen that looks basically like this? This is the way Photoshop ships. Okay? All right. So to fix this, or to change this, the tricky part about this is the first thing I want you to do is come up to the Windows menu. I don't know that this works on Windows because Windows has always had in all of their programming application frames. The Macintosh was very slow to pick up, to get onto that bandwagon. So if you click on the window, if you're on Macintosh, if you come down and you'll see application frame, you should have a check mark next to it. If you're on Windows, I don't even know that you have that. Do you? Is that an option on Windows? Yeah. So because you've always had it. If you uncheck this on a Macintosh, what you see is you've got a screen that shows you don't have an ESO surface that you're actually working on. You go straight through to the background, and whatever's showing on the background you actually see. Not only that, when you try to move this thing around, if I move the image around, it doesn't move all of my palettes around in unison. And I want everything connected. I want one unified workspace. So come up to the window menu, back to saying application frame. And now if you've got an application frame, you can come up, and I will tell you to go to this space all the time. Up where it says Adobe Photoshop 2023, if you need to do anything in Photoshop and you don't want to make a mark or leave something or change something, whatever, this is a safe place to go and click. So if you click up here near this, you can see I can move my entire screen around, and it moves everything. All the palettes are connected, the toolbars are connected, everything is connected on here. If you push your screen down, like I've got mine right now, and I want to see it full screen again really fast, you simply double click right next to that area, that same thing, and it will fill up your entire screen. This will work between monitors, so if you've got it set like this to work on your laptop, and you all of a sudden go to a 32-inch monitor and do the same thing, it will repopulate exactly proportionate to your 32-inch monitor, or anywhere in between. It's brilliant, and it's what you really want. Make sense? Okay, So a couple things first. If you look at the top left-hand corner, top right-hand corner, there's two little icons that exist. If you click on the top one, it is the history palette. We're going to use it, but not here. So to get it off of being the small little icon that's anchored over to the rest of the palettes, click on the tab that says history and simply tear it off and just bring it out into open space on the other side. So it's brought it out here, it's sitting out here, great. We need to do the same thing with comments. Click on comments if you have them. You may not have comments. Oh, you do? Okay. Click on comments. Nobody uses comments. If you do use them, you can always get back to them later. I don't want to use them, so I've torn it off. There's a little X that's right above the word that says comments. Click on that and it gets rid of it. Whew. We're going to do the same thing with a lot of this stuff now. Come over to the top tab, grab your color tab, drag it out and get rid of it. Kill the X on it. Swatches, click on it, drag it out, we're going to get rid of it. Gradients, click on it, drag it out, we're going to get rid of it. Now I've still got patterns up here and I want to keep that up here because I want to now anchor a different palette where patterns actually is. And it's easier to do it before we get rid of patterns because we're going to get rid of patterns. But before we do that, we're going to add the Properties tab to it. So grab the Properties tab, drag it out. You'll see it's sitting out here. Then bring it over on top of the Patterns palette, which is at the top. And you should get this blue line that goes around the entire group of palettes that is up there. And simply let go. Did that work for everyone? Then you need to grab your Patterns tab and tear it off and get rid of it. So we didn't want to get rid of it before we anchored the Properties tab up there because the Properties tab is now anchored to the whole top of this application frame. And otherwise it gets really tricky to actually do that part. We good on this? Okay. How many of you guys are using adjustments? The tab, the palette. So they've just changed things. In the old days, when you actually did this, you could do the single adjustment. You had hue, saturation, brightness, contrast. I suggest that you get rid of this because everything that's here, I need to open an image really quickly just so that you can see it because you can't do that. You can't get to what I need to show you without an image open. So let me open something really quick. Why is your computer so slow? Oh, I know. I've got OBS running, screen capture, heavy graphics use. Oh, I've got Chrome open, pig of the world. Oh, I've still got Acrobat open and probably, Word is still open. Not how you want to work. But at any rate, this guy's now open. All of the tools that exist in here, hue, saturation, brightness, contrast, curves, all that kind of stuff, if you look at the bottom of the icons that are down at the very bottom of the layers palette, on the far right side at the very bottom, there's a circle that's half black, half white. If you click on that, this is all of the adjustments, layers that you can use. So the palette is taking up space that I want, and I don't need it because I've always got this at the bottom of the layers palette. Does that make sense to everyone? However, Photoshop has now updated the adjustments to give you what they call presets. And these presets are now, they're like filters for, social media. I mean, that's basically what they are. And they emulate this stuff. I'm going to suggest you still get rid of it. If you need it, we can always bring it back. But you're not going to be using this every single image that you work on. So I'm going to suggest that you grab the, let me get rid of this image for a second. That you grab the Adjustments tab, drag it out to the middle, and get rid of it. So, Versa, you said I could get rid of it, but, are you sure about that or whatever? If you need to get it back, if you need to get anything that we've thrown away back, you simply come up to the window menu again, and we come down to Adjustments. And it shows up again, and I can click, and I can drag it back in. When I get the blue line, it goes all the way around. It's back again. Make sense? But you're not going to need it. I'm going to get rid of it. Now, libraries is actually holding a spot that I want to leverage for my layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab layers tab and drag it up next to library to anchor this to the properties palette, which is right above it. So I'm going to let go, and then I'm going to grab libraries because I do use libraries, not often, but I do use them. So I'm going to then grab the libraries tab and drag it up to the properties one and let it sit in the background. Make sure that you check the properties tab because when we save our workspace, whatever is the front tab or the back tab or the ordering of it will be saved as well. And I always use properties. I rarely use libraries, so this is a better setup for me. But now my layers palette is actually anchored to the properties tab as well. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, we're getting there, guys. I swear, I know it's been a long day, but okay, I'm going to grab Channels tab right now, and I'm going to tear it off, and I'm going to bring it over to the left side and just leave it parked over there. I'm also going to get rid of this image because I want my image to look like yours. Okay, so basically what I've got going on now here is I've got history sitting over here, channels is sitting over here. Your path tab now, you need to join that to the layers palette. So grab the tab, bring it up on top of, right next to the tabs, are right next to each other. You'll get the blue that surrounds that and let go. And now you've actually got properties, libraries at the top. Layers is what you want to click on because that's what you want to have visible when we're working with it. And this whole right side is ready to go. However, your properties doesn't need this much room, and your layers, as you start to add and build layers, whatever, you can get into layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. You need more room in that. If you hover your cursor right between where the two tabs are touching each other in the palette, so right between where properties and layers is, you'll see that you get a double-headed arrow. Click on that and drag up. This will now give you more room for your layers than you need for your properties, and you should be good to go. So is everybody with me so far? Okay, we're almost done. We need to add something that's rarely, it's not in any default that I know of, and it's one of the most important tools in Photoshop, especially in retouching, and it's the info palette. So to get to it, come up to the window menu and come down to info, and it will simply pop up, and it's anchored right next to the properties panel. We're not going to keep it there. We're going to grab the info palette and we are going to drag it off. And then we're going to bring this all the way over to the tool palette on the other side. And there's a trick to this. So if you drag it over and you start to hover really closely to the toolbar, it needs to almost be like you're pushing it into the toolbar in order to get this blue line. And the blue line is now an indication that this is going to dock the info palette right next to the tools. And let go. When that happens, the info palette populates the entire side over here. We need to actually add history and channels over to this. And you would think, oh, well, naturally, if I want to put history underneath info, don't do this, just watch my screen. I'm just going to grab history, and I'm going to come way down here to the bottom and try to put it on the bottom. That's not how it works. I don't know why. Again, this is UI shit that Adobe does. It drives me nuts every now and then. But if you take a look at the info palette, you'll notice that there's a dark set of lines that happen right underneath it. The one you're looking for is the one that's the bottom of the dark lines. That is what you need to drag this history palette to. And now when you come up and just touch that line underneath, you will actually get a blue line that's showing you, I'm not anchoring this to my toolbar. That would be this, with the blue line going on the toolbar. I'm actually anchoring it to the info palette, and then let go. This has now got my info, my history is now anchored underneath my info, and then, in the irony of all ironies for UI, if you grab the channels, I want the channels underneath the history. This one you actually do drag to the bottom. So grab your channels, drag it down to the very bottom. You'll see that you get a blue line that goes right underneath your history tab, and you let go. And it will actually put your channels down there. Now we've got a little more work to do. I personally don't need this much history, and I need to see my channels. So again, I'm going to do that same hover trick. Hover right between the channels palette and the history palette. You'll get the double-headed arrow. Click and drag up. So it's about a third and a third and a third, roughly. And then finally, the last thing that we need to do is add actions. So if you go to the window, drop-down menu, and come down to actions, actions will actually pop up. Normally, it pops up right next to the history, and some of you, it may have actually added a tab into the history tab. In my case, it didn't, because they've now mirrored it with comments. So I'm going to drag actions off so that I get the comments again by itself. I'm going to kill the comments, and then I'm going to grab the actions and drag it over into the history palette till I get the blue line that goes all the way around history, and I'm going to let go. Actions is now the front tab. I want it to be the back one, and I'm going to click on history. And after all of that work, this is your retouching workspace. To save that, come up to the window menu, down to workspace, down to new workspace, and give it a name. I would consider calling it retouching. I've done 29 of them, or actually I've done, 129 of them. But anyway, and then simply hit save. I'm going to cancel mine because I've already got one. So did this work for everyone? All right, so really quickly, go up to your window menu, come down to click on workspace. You should see it sitting up at the very top. These are the user workspaces. Does everybody have the one they saved up at the very top? So now if you come down and you click on Essentials again, and then again, back up to workspace, down to Reset Essentials, it goes back to what you had in the very beginning, the way Photoshop ships. But if you go back to Window now to Workspace and pick on your retouching one, and then again, second trip up to the same menu and do a reset, you should have the space that we're going to work in for the rest of the semester. This is also included in your preference files right now. So if for some reason that you lose this and you don't want to rebuild it again, you can just reset it. To find it, for Macintosh people, this is more difficult than Windows people. Again, we'll get to this next week. No, I take it back. We won't get to this next week. We got to do this now. So for Macintosh people, they've hidden the user library, which is where all of this stuff is stored. So for the Macintosh people, come to your Finder, and I want you to click on Go, on the Go menu. And if you click on the Go menu, you'll notice that there is no library in this drop-down list right here. Depending on your computer, you add either the Shift key or the Option key. If you add the Shift key, in my case, it just gives me something to select a startup disk. But if I add the Option key, library shows up, and this is the user library. Apple has hidden this deliberately because if you muck around in here too much, you can really fuck up your computer. But for us, we know what we're doing, so I don't need to worry about that. Go ahead and click on Library now. Your screen will change to Library, and now in order to actually keep that so you don't need to remember that shortcut, hover your cursor over the word that says Library at the top of the window, click the little icon of the folder and drag it over into your favorites and let go. You will now have a favorite that will get you to your user library from now on. And all of those files are actually found in, well, I'll show you where they actually are. So if we take a look really quickly. I'm sorry, what? So, so click on the Go menu and add either the Shift key or the Option key, and you should see Library. And then select it. Do you get it?
And then you click library.
Okay. So, no, you're good. Just, no, go ahead and hold down the Option key.
Option.
And Library showed up right there.
Oh.
Scroll down and click on Library. Perfect. Great. This is now the library. Now, to avoid having to do that anymore, you can let go of that key. Click on the little icon of the folder and simply drag it over here onto your favorites and let go. And it's always there. Now you just click on that guy and you'll be in the library. So anyway, what I wanted to find here was where my preferences actually are for Photoshop. So they're in the user library in the preference folder under Adobe Photoshop under settings. So I'm going to show you where you just made that, where you just saved that custom workspace. So I'm going to go to my library. This is my users library, down to preferences. Realize that there's preference panes and preferences. You don't want to go into panes, you want to go into preferences. Then we're going to actually scroll over to Adobe. I'm working in 2023 settings right here, so I'm going to click on that, scroll down to the very bottom, and in workspaces, you will actually find yours. So you can drag this workspace out so that if you're trying to only load your workspace on another computer, this is the only file that you want to replace. You wouldn't want to replace the entire set of preferences because, you know, let's say you're working with another photographer, another retoucher, or whatever, and they've got their computer set up exactly the way they want it. All you want is your custom workspace in here. This is the only file that you would drag. Otherwise, you replace this entire folder.
Can you drag that to favorites?
The library, you drag that to your favorites. Because it's just easier to get to. You don't have to remember the keyboard shortcut. Questions? Okay.
So the preferences file, do you open Photoshop first and then drag that file in?
No, you would quit Photoshop because you can't change the preferences of a program that's already open. It won't let you do it. So it wouldn't matter. Make sense?
When I click on it, it doesn't open
When you click on what?
the preferences.
Oh, it won't.
Oh,
All that's doing is just remembering the settings that you made.
okay.
It's not a Photoshop file at all.
So
Yeah.
what do I run in?
Yeah, you won't. What you can do is you can copy that to your desktop. So simply drag it to your desktop. Now it's lost, so drag it back in. Good, and go ahead and say okay. Yeah, move it. Now click and no, you can click and drag it to your desktop, but hold down the Option key and you'll make a copy of it. And just let go. So now you've got a copy that you can always use, but it's also still in Photoshop, and you're good to go. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Verse of Jesus. We haven't touched the first image. Let's work on an image for 20 minutes. I know, right? I told you there's no, hey, hang in there. Okay, so if you can go to the assignment folders that you copied, that we passed around, and go to your Class 1 files. Inside the Class 1 files, there's a folder called redcard.psd. If you can double-click on that, and hopefully it launches up into Photoshop. It's called redcard.psd. Can everybody find it? We good? And you've opened up this car in Photoshop? Okay. Anybody not have this open? Because otherwise this is going to get tricky. So, one of the advantages of having this workspace is this. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times when I work in Photoshop, images will actually go underneath palettes, and you lose part of stuff. You can't see it. You've got to move your image around to be able to see it. Double-click on the hand. In the toolbar over here, there's a hand. Just double-click on it really quick.
Do you have to quit Photoshop first and
No.
then like open it again?
Okay, how do I get it to, it's like a separate window, just like yours,
Yep.
but mine is like blank, it doesn't show through that, it doesn't like pop up, if that makes any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Look,
That's
it's
okay.
like, it's like here, right, when I open it,
Yeah.
it just does that, but then that's it, like my Photoshop itself is like here. Does it, you see?
Quit Photoshop really quickly and just restart it.
Okay, let me just quit it. Oh, okay, okay. And now I have to find this again. Oh, it was right there. Okay, there you go, thanks.
We'll see.
No, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You may have multiple versions of Photoshop. which I do. It's not the worst thing in the world. You can have multiple versions of Photoshop, but just realize that sometimes then you can have both of them running and one's opening and something that you're looking in one and not, anyway, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we've double clicked on this and you can see it scales it as big as it can get without losing any of the image. And this actually migrates to external monitors as well. Any other sizing, this will work as well. If you double click on the magnifying glass underneath it, it takes it to 100% automatically. But the advantage to this is that double clicking on the hand will always give you all of your image as big as it can be given the borders of your palettes, of everything that's set up in here. It's just they're great quick shortcuts to get to really fast. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to get bigger than this, but nonetheless, that's where it is. Really quickly, if you come up to your view menu and you come down to gamut warning and let go, you will see what this is set up to do. So the gamut warning right now is the profile, what we're doing, the soft proofing that we're doing right here is for a CMYK printer. So it would be basically, a newspaper or magazine printer. That's the default. We can change this to look at your own printers, that kind of stuff. But you can see this is now showing you the colors that are too saturated to print on a CMYK printer. That's why we made this thing that green so that you could really see it. If it ends up being black and white, you can see it somewhat. You would see it on the car, whatever, but it's really hard to see in other places. But nonetheless, that's what that's all about. You can actually go back to gamut warning and uncheck it, and it will go off. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to set my timer for 30 seconds. Hang on. Okay, so you guys have 30 seconds to turn the car green. Go. Stop. How'd you do? Work in progress. No, a lot of head shaking, that's okay. Ooh, great car. Great, so how do we do it?
Adjustment layer, hue and saturation.
Adjustment layer, hue, saturation. Can you show everybody your screen really quick? Because that's how most people do it. Still a red car, still, a lot of red cars still. Ooh, very green car. No, I love that. Ooh, green car, still hue, saturation, right? Yep.
Where are the paint buckets?
Oh, okay. Good, still hue saturation, right? Same thing, hue saturation, looks like it, correct? Yeah, okay. Good, not the worst idea in the world. I need somebody to time me. So first off, I want to show everybody what most people did. So most people put on a hue saturation curve, and then if you were smart, you narrowed your selection to just the red, and then you shifted to green, and you got a green car. So I'm going to get rid of that. So does somebody have a timer out? Hang on 1 second. Let me just see where I'm at right here really quickly. Just tell me when to go.
You want me to just do a timer?
Yeah, do a timer. Yeah, just like a stopwatch.
Okay, ready, set, go.
Perfect. Stop.
18 seconds.
And I had to move the palette. I would have gotten it under 15 if I hadn't had to move the palette.
But that also turned the house green, didn't it?
Oh, it does turn the house green, but look at the quality of that color shift.
Okay.
Would you rather start with this and use a mask on that, or would you prefer to do that and try to work with that?
It's even half and half in the house.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah. So, any idea what I did? This is why color theory matters. So ultimately what I did, it's going to be, again, we're going to get into a little bit of color theory right now because that's going to how we're going to finish out today. And without getting too, I don't want to necessarily, let me do this. I want to get into the color theory part. We'll start today, we'll probably finish next week, and at the end of it next week, I will then explain what happened here, right? Because that way it gives you context. Because right now, if I told you basically what's going on, if you don't really have any color theory background, you're going to have no clue, right? Fair enough? Okay. So you can close that part up. We've got 20 minutes or so. This class ends at 10 till, yeah, 15 minutes, whatever time we've got till 10 till. I'm going to try to get through as much of this as I can. I don't want to go too fast because I do really, really, really want you guys to pay attention to this and to actually get through all of this. So, everybody keep your Photoshop going because we're going to actually jump into Photoshop here as well in just a second, but we'll see. Okay, so RGB and CMY, you'll see the parentheses, K is in parentheses right here. We'll talk about what that is in just a second. But these are tri-stimulus descriptions of color. Now, don't get all flipped out about the word tri-stimulus. That's not something that's like overwhelming. All it means is that there's 3 stimuli. All the color models that we work with, pretty much everything that we do, the way film was designed, all of that kind of stuff, whatever, is all mirrored on your eyes. So all of these systems are based on your eyes. Your eyes are RGB, and they are tri-stimulus. You have got cells in your eyes that recognize only red. You've got cells that recognize only green, and cells that recognize only blue. Combining all of those together in various amounts give you all the colors in the rainbow, everything that you could possibly imagine. But the whole RGB system was based on how your eyeballs work. So, again, don't get flipped out about the word. So, the way they figured this out, if we take a look at, I'm going to explain this illustration to you in just a second. So there's a white wall right here, there's a screen, and there's a shelf that comes out from this screen right here. Above the shelf are 3 lights that are all on rheostats, and rheostats allow you to control the amount of light. You can increase the red, increase the green, decrease the green, and same thing with the blue. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on here? Underneath the shelf is a target color. It's a single color, it's a purplish kind of color. Underneath it, that's what's showing up underneath this. It's not spilling into the top. So these lights are separate from one another. What you see on the top and what you see on the bottom are separate from one another. So they actually did this. These were experiments. There's now a wall over here that blocks the viewer from being able to see all these lights and stuff. But they have a control that can control the amounts of green, red, green, and blue. And right now, they're not set to actually match the target color. But by manipulating the amounts of those, they can actually reach the target color. And the reason this part is important, so now they actually see the same color, is that you understand this. Every color that we can deal with, that we can describe, that exists in our world, you can express as amounts of red, green, and blue. Does that make sense? Okay, so when we look at it, these are the additive primaries. So in the additive primaries, red, green, and blue are the primaries in this system. Cyan, magenta, and yellow are the secondaries. So imagine that these are 3 different projectors that are shooting out light. One is a green projector, one's a blue, and one is a red projector. Where the green and the blue overlap, where these 2 mix together, you get cyan. Where the green and the red overlap, you get yellow, which is always odd to me because it doesn't look like that should ever happen, but it does. And then where you mix the green and the blue together, you actually get magenta. Where you mix all three together, you actually get a neutral gray. Now, it's important to keep in mind that white is a neutral gray, black is a neutral gray, middle gray is a neutral gray. That's a different story altogether. That has to do with brightness, but this color in the center is a neutral gray. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So this is an emissive system. It is a system like a monitor or a projector. Light comes from it. It's not light reflecting off of it. Like that screen back there is not an emissive system. There's light hitting that screen and bouncing off. That is a completely different animal. This guy right here is an emissive system. You start with black. You start with no light. It is the absence of light. Then you add amounts of RGB to achieve any color that you want. Equal amounts. This is, if anything from this you take away, the early part of this lecture right now is this thing right here. Equal amounts of any RGB equals gray. This is how white balancing works. When you guys go into either Lightroom or Camera Raw and you use the little white balancing tool, what you're doing when you click on whatever it is you click on, it makes whatever was underneath that little eyedropper that you click on, it makes whatever color that is neutral gray.
So it adds to this.
It can subtract too, though. It does both.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So white is equal amounts of RGB at the maximum intensity. That's just what white is. How black is black? This is one of the biggest problems that we've got here. Can everybody, if you can't see this, stand up. Can you see this screen? This is as black as it gets. How do I get any blacker than the fucking screen turned off? Right? There's no magic that goes on in here. I don't turn the screen on and somehow it like sucks light out as a light sponge in here. This is as black gets. However, everybody watch this screen for me, please. Did it change? It's considerably blacker. So what controls in your retouching, what controls the black point of all of your images? Environment, not brightness, environment. You need your screen to be black like this to begin. Then we can start adding light to this and we're off to the races. But that room in there, the digital print lab, anybody printing that thing yet? So you have a history in there, right? They've asked me to fix this and I've come in. You're not going to be able to turn the lights on there ever again because it's too fucking bright in there. What happens is, if you have a room that is bright, your screen, your black point of your screen appears lighter. And you, thinking that the problem is in your file, actually drive the blacks in your file down more to make them really black. But the problem is not your file, the problem is the screen and the room that you're in. This controls everything. How many of you guys retouch? You'll never see me in anything but a black shirt. Why? Two reasons. Number one, working in the studio, it doesn't impact anything, but more importantly, in front of a computer screen, you wear your cute little pink sweater in front of the computer screen, it reflects pink, and all of your images have a pink cast. It's not your file, it's your fucking sweater. So a real retouching space, most people will paint the walls gray. There's a very specific gray, it's called a Munsell 8, that you paint your walls. It's very close to the gray color that Photoshop uses as that darker of the grays application color. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? Okay. So, and you can see in this case, I'm starting with black. When I start to fire the guns in that monitor to actually add light, additive process. And if I keep adding and adding and adding equal amounts of RGB and I hit my maximum intensity, that screen will be white. To your point though, what controls the white point? It is the brightness of your screen, which is the second problem all of you guys have, is you are firing your screen so fucking bright, I'm shocked that you can see anything. Your eyeball should have fallen out of your head by now. All of us are supporting a really good tan, and it's all coming from the radiation out of these things. It's got nothing to do with, hanging out outside, right? So all of that we're fixing in this class. But meanwhile, the subtractive primaries. So in the subtractive primaries, we are dealing with cyan, magenta, and yellow. You can think of these as inks. Red, green, and blue are the secondaries. So if you take magenta ink and you combine it with yellow ink, you get red. If you take magenta ink and combine it with cyan, you get blue. If you mix cyan with yellow, you get green. If you mix all three together, theoretically, you get black. The problem is that you can never achieve black because there's no such thing as a pure pigment. They cannot find pigments that are pure enough. Cyan is the worst one. Cyan is really, really, really inefficient. Magenta and yellow are still both inefficient, but there is no perfect system for that. So you will never get black. If you combine the three of those together at their maximum intensity, you get shit brown. So to fix that problem, what they do is they start removing equal amounts of these pigments and they introduce black ink. So when you see an image that you're looking at, photograph, any of that kind of stuff, when you see an image, basically the midtones, the quarter tones, and the highlights are all being made up by the CMYK inks. However, when you get into the darker areas, and the black ink has started to really take over and control what you really see. So let me finish this part, and if there are questions about this. So how does this work? Why is this chair red? Why is this red? So what's happening in here, white light, although that's not really white light, but white light, if we had the lights on in the room, white light contains all the colors of the rainbow. And whatever they dyed that chair with, the color that they used to dye that chair, absorbs all the colors of the rainbow except for the red. And it reflects the red, and that's why we see red. This yellow paper right here, all the colors in the rainbow are being absorbed by this. The ink in here is absorbing all of that color except for yellow, and it rejects the yellow is reflected, and therefore we see it as yellow. Make sense? So in the case of a subtractive system, unlike the additive system, we started with black. Subtractive system, we start with white. If you subtract amounts of RGB, again, to achieve any color, pure CMYK pigments do not exist. That's why, for us anyway, nobody would retouch in RGB. You'll find old school drum scanner people who actually do all their color correction in CMYK, but they are like witchy people. I mean, they have got some serious voodoo stuff going on, whatever. I mean, it's just, no, it's like they speak a language all their own. I mean, to watch them do it, it's just insane. Because it's so difficult. It's so incredibly difficult to do. Anyway, RGB is relatively simple to do. So, equal amounts of CMY do not equal gray. This is the biggest problem that we run into. So none of us are ever going to work in CMYK. You can output a destination file as a CMYK file, but you would do all of your work using RGB. CMYK is just too difficult. If we take a look really quickly, so jump into your Photoshop really fast. We're almost done here, guys. We got 2 minutes. I'm going to just do Command N to create a new file. Again, this is the old file dialog box that's opened up. I don't care what size it is. I'm just going to actually open this guy up. And I'm going to fill this with a color. So I'm going to come over to my color picker. It's the 2 color swatches that are at the very bottom of your tool palette. If you click on the one that's to the left, the one that's more in the front, it'll open up the color picker. And I am just going to type in a value. I'm going to do 255R. tab key, 0 green, tab key, 0 blue. And that did not give me what I wanted, so let's try this. Oh, actually, I know what I'm doing here. Yeah, sorry, let me go back to that. Pure red. I'm going to drag now. I want to change the brightness of this because I don't want it quite that bright. So if you look at the radio buttons on here, there's an HSB. It stands for hue, saturation, brightness. Just click on the B button to give you it turns the column into whatever radio button you've picked, and just grab the slider and pull it down a little bit. So I'm going to pull it down kind of in the middle, and look at the CMYK values that exist over here. This is a pure red. It's not it doesn't have a lot of brightness, but it is pure red. It's fully saturated, but look what happens down here. I can't, I'm using 100% magenta ink, 100% of my yellow ink. I've still got some cyan in here, which doesn't make any sense, but I've got 17% black ink to make this color. This is impure. These are not. It's why we work in RGB, and it's the challenge in getting to this. The calculations to calculate K here, that is the stuff that physics students and
I have a question. What
Shoot.
are those A and B, 58 and 50?
so this is LAB, and this is exactly what I used to make the car green. So hold that thought.
Okay.
Okay. So, almost done, almost done. I just want to finish up the last slide here, and then we'll call it a day, and I'll see you guys next week. So, let me just get through the last of the slides. Over here. Okay. So black is not equal to the CMYK at its maximum intensity. You've got to in it. This is why we actually need the black. How white is white? The last question. We talked about how black was, our starting point. How white is white? I'm sorry, somebody said something.
Max brightness.
No.
Nothing.
No. In a subtractive system, we start with white. It's the piece of paper. You can't get any whiter than the piece of paper you're printing on, can you? That's as white as it gets. Then all of the inks that we add to paper are designed to work our way ultimately to black. If we end up using the maximum amounts of ink, both CMY and K, we end up with a black image, or black on our paper. Yes?
So, thinking of that, for example, if I was thinking more like if I have overexposed sky on my picture and I print it out, then it just does it put white ink on it, or is it just invisible?
There is no white ink. It's just letting the paper show.
It's just be, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So this is the idea, last thing to get into your heads, the idea of additive system. You start with black, you add to ultimately get to white. In a subtractive system, you start with white and you subtract. Remember, inks are absorbing this light. They're absorbing the light, not letting it being reflected. And if you absorb it all, you have black. Are we good? Okay. I know this is a lot. Most of you should be a little freaked out right now. I made a promise to you at the beginning. I will get you through this. You need to do the work. Stay with me, and I'll see you guys next week. Yes?
Those tablets that you said.
Oh, I'll send out an email about that. So we do work with graphics tablets in this class, and they have one for each of you in the media center. You simply need, I'll send you an email about it, but you basically got to email them to make an appointment to go pick up your tablet, and I want you to do that before next week, but I'll send you an announcement. It explains it all. All right, see you guys.
I ordered one since it was on sale on B&H for like $35.
That's fine.
Hopefully it gets here by next week, but it said it would get here like next week's class.
We're not going to be, we're just going to be setting it up next week. So if it's not,
It's like a PDF of how to set it up or something.
well, you'll see again, we go through it all here, so you'll have a video.